Hey guys, it's Jacolia of Jacolia Gems. Thank you so much for coming back to view my channel. I know it's been a little while since I've uploaded an actual video. So on tonight, I'm not sure how long this is going to be. I'm going to keep it under an hour and possibly come back with this topic in greater detail. We shall see how much information I am able to jam into this video. Now, with that being said, if you are new here, welcome. If you are returning, hey family. Thank you so much for the subscriptions, for the likes, for the comments, as well as the shares, and for staying so engaged with me in the comments under the video. Thank you to you men and to you women who don't let people come in the comments cutting up. I will say about 98% of everyone in the comments has been absolutely amazing. Even if we show different viewpoints, there have been some, just a little tension, but I'm a blocker. I do not really believe in engaging with people that I don't know online in a way. Now, I'm not going to hold you. I will check somebody and I will do it in a way that's 9 times out of 10 going to psychoanalyze you in some way, shape, form. And that's just how I am. But I prefer, I really don't do the conflict. So, thank you to those of you who have been in the comments handling it. Like, sis, don't even be on that type of time. We are here to learn and to grow, to heal, to be honest, and to keep it moving. Anything else is counterproductive, and I don't have time for it. So, on today, I'm going to talk about, as you can see in the title, Thanksgiving, Sukkot, the Green Corn Festival. I'm going to talk about Native American tribes. I'm going to talk about specifically the Igbo. I'm going to talk about harvest. I'm going to talk about the Celtic and just a little bit about the Druids and cannibalism. I'm going to talk about the Phoenicians and the Canaanites and practices. I'm going to talk about Hebraic markers and so on and so forth. So before I get into that, I'm going to allow a video of my late mother to introduce this. This video came up in my Facebook memories a few days ago. For those of you who don't know, I grew up in an apostolic Pentecostal church um, on the west side of Chicago. The name of the church was Grace Deliverance Temple. It came out of Bethlehem Healing Temple, which was very known for healing. And Grace was known for some healings, but more sort of deliverance. Um, and although they ebb and flow together, they're not the same thing. I'm not going to get into all of that on this video. Bethlehem Healing Temple, their pastors were known to have relationships with doctors, and doctors would come in with patients' permission, of course, with files and records. Like, no, this patient had AIDS, HIV, they had a tumor, they were paralyzed, they were all of this, and there were cabinets of canes and wheelchairs and things like that in this church on the west side of Chicago of these healings. So the church that I came out of that church, and the church that I came out of, there was a lot of miracles that I saw with my own eyes. And I'm gonna make some videos about that very soon. You guys really stay tuned for some of my stories on some of the things that I have seen in the Black church. With that being said, my mother was my first lady for about 20 years. Her and my father and she pastored on the west side of Chicago, where my father still pastors. The Illinois, they're known. People know who my parents are. Um, my mother, I'm going to introduce who she is and just break down so that you guys can understand the level of scholarship that I come from. Um, and just know that my teachings are reflections of me, my beliefs, and what it is that I have come into. The reason I mention my mother and I'm going to use this video is because she was a historian, she was a history major. And I want to give some background before I play this video. So in the church, I was an ordained elder. I was a licensed evangelist. I started working the altar, healing, and deliverance ministry at the age of 4. Started writing songs at the age of 4, doing praise and worship at the age of 4, singing in the choir at the age of 4. I was the head Sunday school student in my Sunday school class and all of my Sunday school classes. My parents always taught us to study for ourselves. My mom taught me how to study in a lot of ways. My dad taught us about the concordances and the Hebrew and the Greek. My mom taught me how to study from a historical standpoint. And so now I'm coming into the truth of my identity as an Israelite woman. I now lean back to the teachings of my mama. And when I play this clip, y'all gonna see exactly what I'm talking about. And y'all Israelites gonna be like, your mama was teaching like that in the church. And then you guys will see why I say that the church, that my parents' church, it's not a regular Sunday worship church. It's not. The name of my parents' church started off being Faith Deliverance Temple, and now the name of it is Ruach. Excuse me, guys. Is Ruach Worldwide Worship Ministries and Alliances. And for those of you who either speak Hebrew or are familiar and knows that Ruach is the breath of the Most High. Sometimes I'll say the Most High, sometimes I'll say Yohewade, Yahuwah, or Chukwu Okiki on Beyond By, which means the Most High God of Abraham in Igbo, in the restored language. So with that being said, my mom, I'm showing you guys a picture of her, right? This is my mom, the Most Reverend Dr. Patricia A. Holliday. And on the 24th of this month, it will be a year since my mother left us. And I'm going to give you guys just a little background of her and of who she was and who she is, because our ancestors live on when we invoke their names and when we share stories. And I'm sharing her oral tradition right now. And so you guys are getting some knowledge of a great Hebraic woman that lived amongst us and did many charitable acts. And I'm not the only one that will come on this channel to begin to make sure that the spirit of such a great woman who was holy and who was devout to the Most High continues to live on. So Apostle Dr. Patricia A. Holliday, my mama was born in Sharkey, Mississippi, in a house in Mississippi, in the deltas of Mississippi Bayou, to my beautiful grandmother, Alma Ruth. Hold on to that name, Ruth. Ruth was what? Who was Ruth in the Bible? Was she a Moabite or was she a Gadite? I know I'll be seeing y'all out there argue about that. And what do some Moors claim to be? Moabites. Which will lead us back to Mauritania and to France. And how did a lot of our ancestors get over here from the French Revolution, whether they were Moors or French Jews? And a lot of them began to go into the West Indies and became your Haitians, right? And they began to see that they had relative Native American Hebrews down there who spoke a Creole language. And then when the Igbos came over from West Africa and they spoke a Creole language too, and then you have your Creoles in the Mississippi Bayou and the French Bayou. And okay, so my mom You know, she was a very smart woman. She made a double in elementary school. And she went to Whitney Young, which was the #1 magnet school in Chicago during that time. And I'm gonna say when I went to high school, it was lame. That's what I'm gonna say. My daddy would say it was lame back then too. Um, she furthered her education by graduating from Northeastern University in 1999, receiving her bachelor's degree. And again in 2002, she went to school bike to bike to bike to bike. She received her Master's of Art in Special Education and Applied Behavioral Analysis. Little do a lot of y'all know that when you spoke to my mother, she was psychoanalyzing. I wonder where I get that from. In 2011, she went to get another master's degree from Concordia University in school counseling and psychology. In 2021, because at her funeral, we had the great honor, my oldest sister, myself, and my baby sister, of graduating her at her funeral because she obtained her conferred doctorate degree in pastoral care and Christian counseling from the Brinson Institute of Kingdom Leadership and Development, TBI. So my mother, the most reverend Dr. Patricia Ann Holliday, and even after all them accolades, her favorite thing was to be called my daddy's wife and our mother and our children's grandmother. This is my mother's dissertation that I was blessed to come home with from her funeral. This was required for her doctorate degree. She had to write about her life and some other things. So at this harvest service that I'm about to share, I used to have a youth ministry that my parents were my covering over. Well, I still haven't. I haven't done any services. Called WAR. It was an acronym: Willing and Ready Warriors Applying Rhema. And with that, I would have young people from all over the Chicagoland area from different churches come in. And I formed a praise team with these different young people. We had our own band. We had our own dancers. We had our own altar workers. And I was training and giving the young people a place to come to worship and to bond and to have young services. And I would bring in young ministers to preach the services, and I would pay them out of my own pocket. And I would do this whether it was at my parents' church, I would host it at St. Rome, and I might have had a service at my Uncle Jeff church, but I'm not sure. And so this in particular was a harvest service. The Most High had been just planting on me, getting back to the origins of the Bible, and I wasn't yet like really learned on the feast days, but I knew that harvest, that it was the season for harvest, for in gathering and for cutting away, because my prophetic ear and my insight when it came to how to have the services hooked up, it from what I've begun to realize always fell in line with the Hebraic calendar. So this was a harvest service, and my mom began to talk. So let's listen clearly, and I'm going to let it play all the way through and then expound upon. We used to minister together. I used to minister with my parents. People used to bring the three of us in at some time and have all three of us minister together, or have them minister together in the end. So enjoy.
You can't have friendship. You have yourself to somebody that's the seed that can't coexist with the anointing and vision and destiny that's on your life. And when your friendship breaks apart, you wonder why. Because it was never supposed to be with you in the first place. Because because their seed was not compatible to what God has impregnated you with. So then God has to do a separation in the heart is broken. It's time to begin to pray and ask God, I'm expecting a harvest, but what seed do I need to plant? And then what person do I need to become friends with or hook up with that won't cause my vision to die, that won't cause my anointing to become stagnated, because I'm expecting a growth in this season. And I can't afford for my seed to die because I trust no long enough. I've been waiting on this topic for years. I can't afford to let somebody else sip on what you have for me. So God, are they supposed to be with me in this season? We're talking about a harvest. When we look at a harvest also, it includes judgment. We look at the children of Israel. Ask God, God, I know you promised me something, but because of our disobedience, we can become a harvest, just like the tribe of Judah did for somebody else.
Yep.
So we have to be careful what seeds we are sowing. They sowed seed of disobedience. And because of their disobedience, and they didn't give into, and they didn't take heed to the prophecies that was given unto them by Jeremiah and the other prophets, and they kept sinning, and they didn't learn the lesson for the 10 tribes that went to the Syrian bondage. See, I often told my girls growing up, some things you don't have to go through, you can learn from my mistakes.
Should have listened.
But you know, sometimes people want to learn because they want to be hard, they want to learn on their own. So the tribe of Judah was a harvest in the fall, but they became metaphorically. In Jeremiah, it begins to say that there was a harvest for a lot of this nation.
Well, so let's get into this. Now, what did Queen Mother Nana? My children call my mother Nana, and we're gonna get into some of the mother goddess. Well, to a female goddess, Nana was Nana in Mesopotamia, the mother goddess, and Nana in Bantu in West Africa means grandfather, grandmother. So that's just a little. I'm gonna be dropping nuggets on y'all throughout all this. But when my mommy was speaking, and she began to, you see the practical application and the historical application. You see how she began to talk about the 10 tribes and the Assyrian captivity. So let's begin to look into who the Assyrians are. I'm gonna be off screen, off and on. Y'all know how this go when you studying with me. When you are studying with me, we just gonna walk through this thing together so that we can learn together. And some of you can learn how to actually study of in the kingdom of Judah, which was carried out by Sennacherib, who was the king of the Neo-Assyrian Empire. and they began to take over the Levant. We know that this is Northeast Africa, all of that area over there. And so whenever the Israelites were subjugated, you just need to know that Africa at large was being subjugated. So when we talk about the whitewashing of Egypt, it was the whitewashing of Jerusalem, of all of that area, Mesopotamia, and everything. And so the Assyrians and Judah, they had a lot of interactions, you guys, and you're going to have to really, really keep that in mind. And after the fall of the northern kingdom, the kings of Judah tried to extend their influence and protections to those inhabitants. So this is what my mom began to touch in on. And you would begin to see in the book of Isaiah is when the Assyrian captivity is talked about in depth and in full. And it's very important when you're reading your Bibles to actually look into who these kings were in rule. So you see when they talk about Sennacherib, and when they begin to talk about Tiglath-Pileser or these Hammurabian kings and so on and so forth, you need to be able to line them up with our kings and our dynasties, and this is how you can historically prove the Bible, because it's not that hard to do. So we're going to we're gonna go to Google, because I want you guys to see some I clearly missed the E, speed typing. We're going to see some Assyrian artifacts. Well, let's look into some Assyrian artifacts, so that when I find this video on YouTube to show you guys, you'll see exactly what we're dealing with. So we see that the Assyrian artifacts, no doubt, wings. If you actually come here in Chicago, and what would have in their hands, what it is that they would be doing, worship, the roads. So, yeah. We see this representative in Zoroastrianism as well. And why is that? Because we know that the Assyrians, the Chaldeans, these people, see, they've been paying tribute. I believe Jehu, Ahab, paid tribute to the Assyrians. So, what were some Assyrian practices? Find out. I promise you, when we are done, a lot is going to make sense. It's a lot of information out here. They believe in betrothals and weddings. We have to remember that they have a lot of some similar customs to Israelites, and we're going to get into the scriptures to find out why. I mean, they're Near Eastern people, and whether people begin to describe them as Arab, Persian, Turkish, Kurdish. The primarily death, marriage or death, birth means to the Assyrians. So a lot of people saying, although their origins are often difficult to trace, the rituals practiced by contemporary Assyrians are perhaps as old as the days of ancient Assyria, have been treasured and guarded through the centuries. And they had a lot of wisdom and morals. They had a lot of oral traditions. And so they considered divorce as a disgrace. Only a doula can terminate these practices. Now, we know nowadays that doulas are those who work alongside midwives. In Assyria, Assyrians favored early marriages. It's not uncommonly for a boy 17 to 20 to marry a rather young girl, 12 to 15, though often older. Parents married their daughters off early because they were considered to be of little future value to the family. The marriageable age has steadily increased in recent times. So, the Assyrians believe that women were not valuable, so they sold them off to early marriage. Once the parents have found a girl to the liking and have agreed to seek her betrothal, the father, accompanied by a few relatives, calls a girl's family to express his interest and formally requesting a hand. So this is the dowry process. We see these similar customs when you had to talk to parents and things of that nature first. So these are a lot of similarities. A lot of similarities. The bride also remains silent. I'm gonna leave this down. Now they would perform these ceremonies Sunday 4 a.m. These are their prenuptials, their prayers. They would have a twisted red and white cord, called crown of betrothal. The influence of black magic, it is believed, may cause lack of love between husband and a wife or sterility. It is common ritual for female relatives of the groom to stand behind the bridal pair and repeat open and close a pair of scissors during a ceremony. It is believed that the scissors act as protection against bewitching from an jealous evil eye. Whether it occurs before or after the ceremony, to further ward off evil and mischief, a cross-shaped pair of needles is usually stuck into the back of the groom's coat. The cruciform shape of this ornament, it is believed, possesses the power of protection to repel the effect of the evil eye. Not only these needles help save the groom from misfortune, they also capable of turning wickedness against the mischievous. Not to be overlooked is practiced among the Baznai Assyrians. The bats on the shoulders of the officiating priests and deacons, these Assyrians believe, may become the embodiment of little demons, Satani Dakwike, during the ceremony. The shoulders of the churchmen are pricked sharply with pins or needles to dispatch them of harm of the evils. Needless to say, these pricks may distract the clergyman and lead to commotions that interrupt the ceremonies. I won't even finna go here because now I don't even know if I'm be able to find this video. Now I'm gonna have to try to find this video. I'm gonna have to try to find this video, y'all. Like, I'm gonna have to try to find this video because that sounds like Acupuncture. And I want to, okay, so I'm going to do this. So some people feel like acupuncture is witchcraft because you have no control over your being when it begins to happen. Some feel as if acupuncture is making a person into a literal voodoo doll. And people have been taught so many misnomers about other people, cultures, and religions without actually studying them. And they believe that a voodoo doll is being to use to prick, to control, and to manipulate. Now, those are the people who use the Orishas for bad. But now I need to try to mm, mm, mm. Now I need to try to find this video because that was see, now I don't even know if the truth of it is going to come out. So I'm gonna just link down below because it's so many different maybe this one will be accurate because she's from New Orleans. Let's see what she says, and then I'm gonna see if it's exactly right.
Hi, I'm Diane Gumbo Marie here in the French Quarter. I am a native of New Orleans, and I'm here in front of my ancestral home, which is where my sixth-generation great-grandmother lived, Catalina Destrahan. She's actually buried in the same cemetery as Marie Laveau, St. Louis number 1 over on Basin Street. At any rate, we do believe she may have practiced voodoo here herself in the early 1800s. People often ask me about voodoo and voodoo dolls are back to the late 1800s here in New Orleans, and they're all made a little bit differently depending on who the voodoo practitioner is. So some of them are made like this with Spanish moss and grigri bags attached. Grigri is another good luck amulet that you will find all over the city of New Orleans. And she has the X across her chest, which stands for the quasi-yen in Haitian voodoo, which is where the world of the living meets the world location.
Okay, so that was not the video, but what she said was very interesting, and I could definitely land me back off of that. So you saw how they was crosses, right? And how she began to say that that was the cross between the living and the dead. And we see that the Assyrians believe the same thing clearly. And when we begin to look into the different type of crosses and we are led back to the Ankh, we should know that, as I listed, and I'm going to put the video to Aquaman down in the description so you guys can see me link that together. The Ankh leads us back to ancient Sumer. More Zion Lex broke that down as well. I found that video. The Ankh leads us back to ancient Sumer to Enki, who was the Lord of life, the Lord of the waters. And so this is why it's believed that the cross is a key and it's unlocking to between death and to life. So that was very, very interesting. So the video that I was looking for, some people say that when they use a voodoo doll and the pins, they are using it to extract that part of the body from malicious spirits. So I just thought that it was interesting that you guys see the correlation between the Assyrians and to what's practiced over here, and the evil eye, and even the bridal chamber, and it's a lot of customs that are very similar between the Assyrians and the Hebrews as well. And this is because they lived amongst one another, but it's also because it's some things that a lot of people gloss over in scripture that needs to be addressed. So when we look at the different nations of people, we can begin to see why there are similarities and why some of them are different. On another, but it's also very prophetic within time as well. And some people begin to misappropriate some scriptures in Isaiah to begin to contribute them to Yeshua Bar Yosef or Jesus, son of Joseph, Jesus the Messiah, and some transliterations. Isaiah 19:23 said, "In that day shall there be a highway out of Egypt to Assyria, and the Assyrian shall come into Egypt, and the Egyptian into Assyria, and the Egyptian shall worship with the Assyrian." Why would they be worshiping with the Assyrian? Why would the Assyrian and Egypt even have a temple? Why do they need temples and a highway when this is talking about this type of prophecy? Um, um, so it's a particular scripture. I can't find it right now. It's a scripture in Isaiah. I think it is Isaiah 19, though. Begins to talk about the Assyrians and the Egyptians being the people of the Most High. And we know that the Egyptians, this is judgment against the Egyptians because they turned their backs. They began to help enslave. I'm going to find it, you guys. Definitely find it and link it down below. Oh, it begins to talk about, "In that day, 5 cities in Egypt will speak the language of Canaan and swear alliance to Yod-Heh-Wav-Heh. One of them will be called the City of the Sun, Heliopolis, the City of the Sun." Now, I want you guys to know that in a lot of these movies, Superman specifically, especially, even in the latest Scooby-Doo movie, they were always something taking place in Egypt and in Greece, and they would always look identical. And so the Egyptians are going to begin to cry out, and the Most High is going to acknowledge them, as well as, there it go. See, I knew it. In that day, Israel will be the third, along with Egypt and Assyria, a blessing on earth. The Lord Almighty will bless them, saying, "Blessed be Egypt, my people, Assyria, my handiwork, and Israel, my inheritance." I know some of y'all watching video like, "Sis, it's right there. It's in your face. It's in your face. It's right there." So when we begin to look at the tribes that I'm about to bring out, remember, some of them are Egyptians, some of them are Assyrians, some of them are Israelites, some of them are Edomites, so on and so forth. So let's get into this. Okay. So let's talk about Thanksgiving. You know, we were taught that Native Americans and some pilgrims came together and they were eating together and everything was peaceful at one point, and then stuff went crazy. So first of all, we have to even figure out, who are the pilgrims? Where did the pilgrims come from? So we have to figure out, they were in England. And we have to solve the identity and realize that they were a branch of Jews in England. Okay? And we have to know that they suffered massacres and they were executed for their all right? Remember this. So when you begin to look at the people, the Jews, who they say are responsible for the slave trade with the help of the Roman Catholic Church, we have to have a talk about indentured servitude and slavery amongst the Hebrews, and how the Hebrews were known to link up with other nations to fight against their own people and to take on the religion of other nations while still practicing the Jews' laws undercover. This is what you would call cryptos or conversos. This is the veneration of Yod-Heh-Wav-Heh along with other deities. We see this across cultures. So, let's simplify history so that we can understand it. Okay, the few references of Jews in Anglo-Saxon laws of the Roman Catholic Church relate to Jewish practices about Easter. Yeah, we're not going to touch that today because that's a whole nother can of whatchamacallits. So, we need to realize that they spoke Judo-French. A Sephardic. We have to look at the correlations between these words. So they got kicked out of England. Okay? It was some massacres. It was some wars. A significant loss of life happened the Sabbath before Passover. They love to attack the Hebrews before and around their holy days because they knew when they would be susceptible. This is why Yeshua Bar Yosef began to prophesy and say, you better hope it ain't on the Sabbath and you better hope it ain't in winter. Because either way you go, you're going to have to keep the Sabbath and flee. And you can only travel a certain distance on the Sabbath before you break the law. It ain't always about you breaking the law. So let's we see that, right? The Jews in England. It's more. I'm gonna leave a lot of the articles down here for you guys. So let's get a little more. Another article. This is from Oxford. This is on the early modern history from 1500s to 1700s. History of religion, social and cultural history, British history. And the chapter suggests that the earliest generous treatment of the Jews by James II was designed, at least in part, to affirm his power to dispense with penal statutes. King James II gave the Jews of England what amounted to a declaration of indulgence at the very time when the entire issue of his suspending and dispensing powers. So it was a lot of controversy. And so we see in this time, there was fleeing. We have to begin to put dates to stuff because remember in 1492, Columbus came over here with another set of conversos because he was a converso, a Sephardic. Okay, so a lot of these practices was already being practiced amongst the Sephardic Jews and some of these Native Americans. When they saw each other and had similar customs, everything was cool. We gotta study, y'all. We have to study. There were Moors on the ship of Columbus. We're going to play this video. Now I do not share all the beliefs of this brother in this video. He seems to be pretty anti-Africa and 100 like everybody's native. So I don't do that.
Edited by Nathaniel P. Smirlet, MD, lists Abraham Pierce, the Blackamoor. A number of historians with experience examining the records have looked at it over the years, and without exception that we know of, they would concur that he was a black man. Martin said some descendants of Abraham Pierce did not concur. Oh, I wonder which ones. Could it be the so-called white ones? And again, I'm going to tell you guys this, and I'm going to tell anybody listening right now, a lot of so-called white people descend from so-called black people. Especially the farther in history in America you go. Because most of them go right into Europe right away, or Ellis Island. The ones who don't, hey. All the fun out of being a to the nobility, and if these people's nobility, first of all, so now he don't got the pride anymore, because now he found out there were so-called black men as pilgrims too. Although it's not any more fun anymore, no more prestige. That's very, very prejudiced and racist. I don't think man, I don't even know why they would even correct him and tell him, hey, that was kind of racist, sir. It says here, additional research. The museum decided additional information was needed, and they brought in other museum researchers, including Jim Baker, to investigate. Martin had based his case on the 1861 publication, but it turns out that the book was a transcription of a slew of colonial records. Baker found the original 1643 document and found that it read differently. On one line was the name Abraham Pierce, and under his name, not next to it, read the words the Blackamoor. All right, so it's still there. Baker interpreted that to mean there were actually two men, Abraham Pierce and an unidentified black man. So now they're going into conjecture. Either way, there's still a black man there, right? They just said it. They're still admitting there was a so-called black man in the Pilgrim list, right? Pierce appears in the colonial record at least 30 times, Baker said. He married someone who was obviously part of the regular community. What do you mean, regular community? What does that mean? You understand how they're writing this with their racist, all Europeans are white views, and all so-called black people are from Africa? His children continue on and have descendants. There's never any mention that he was noticeably black. Hey, like I said, we're about to open Pandora's box. A lot of people's about to be hurt. A lot of people's going to find out a lot of things that they never would have imagined. And again, a lot of white folks descend from black folks, especially the more history they got in America. Who was the original Europeans that were coming? We're about to see. We already broke it down in the past videos regarding, the Swarthy Europeans, Sephardic Jews, the Huguenots, Protestants, the Palatines, all that, Black Irish, and we're still gonna keep doing a lot more. I'm not even halfway done. Nope. So I wanted to read this to you. Of course, about the DNA trail. Right. So it's funny because look at how they reason. Look at their concerns why he couldn't have been black. I'm gonna read it to you. It says, fast forward to the 21st century, we now live in the age of CSI, where sophisticated DNA tests could put this controversy to rest. In fact, amateur genealogist and radiologist Dr. Brad Pierce of Little Rock, Arkansas, has reviewed DNA tests of 2 Abraham Pierce descendants. We can say with virtual certainty that the father of Abraham and his ancestors of the male Pierce line are not of African descent. So check this out. Because they're not going back to Africa now all of a sudden. Well, who's telling you he was African? Who said he was African? Just because, see, now they're talking about just because of color. Everybody's supposed to be from Africa, right? So because it didn't match, oh, look, this is our proof. He's not African. Well, duh, right? What do we know in this community? That not all so-called black people come from Africa, right? Right? So of course he's not gonna go back to an African gene. Of any European being an indigenous black African what? Theory. So now that also include nope. That's only if you take it like that, that's because right now the truth is hurting you. But we're about to read a genealogical history. We already got sources. We already know in my 3 Swarthy Euro videos, and I could do part 4, 5, 6, and we got the anthropological books. We know the early Europeans. Oh, I didn't make up Cheddar Man, right? What is Cheddar Man? I didn't make this up. I'm not the one saying this. Cheddar Man, right? Hey, Cheddar Man, what's up? They say that's the first European right there. That's what the first European looked like. That's what they're saying, right? He looked a little copperish, right? And then check this out. Who's this? So I'm not the one saying or trying to hijack anybody's history or culture. This here 9,000-year-old woman shared features with Cheddar Man. Look at her complexion. As experts have reconstructed the face of a woman who lived in Spain 9,300 years ago, who appears to have been similar to Cheddar Man, suffered from toothache and died in a cave and collapsed. All right, study her. The face of Elba, the Mesolithic woman. All right, Cheddar Man and her. I'm not the one saying it. So just because somebody may look like this and their DNA is not going back to Africa, that doesn't disprove anything. That's just silly. You see? That's just pseudo. That's silly. Everybody didn't come out of Africa. The Washington Post. At Thanksgiving, the search for a black pilgrim among Plymouth settlers. Say what? Was one of the Plymouth colony settlers a black man? So-called black. The search for a black pilgrim began decades ago. Then in 1981, historians announced with great fanfare that they had finally found enough evidence that one early settler was indeed of Taj the Hijack, that he was of color, he was dark complexion. They're adding the African. Remember, they did a DNA test to his ancestor. It didn't go back to Africa. That man was included in 1643 record listed the names of men able to serve in Plymouth Mass militia. He was identified as Abraham Pierce Blackamoor. Blackmoor, the derivative of Blackmoor, was a term used to describe someone with dark skin. Black Moors had roots in North Africa and often worked as servants or enslaved people in Europe. That's the hijack, because they drop a little truth, then they add the narratives. They're not just servants, all right? And they didn't just originate in North Africa either. That's the hijack. This is real. They admitted it. They admitted it. So we're about to read today, empty your cup and try to gain some new understanding. All right, so I wanted to come back and continue reading from this book. Great book. We've learned a lot of correlation in it when it comes to
Oh man, guys, I'm so sorry. I was on mute this entire time, but you guys got to see the picture. But so sorry. I was explaining that this was some of the art in Italy representation of Blackamoor. And it was also a video that I'm gonna try to find of this Italian he said that his people are black. Their Hebrews would call black people mules. They would just identify them as Moors. That's what he said. He said it wasn't a racist term. And now we see the style is now viewed by some as racist and culturally insensitive. However, Blackamoor pieces were all really produced in Venice and Italy because these Moorish people. And we see that the turbans, the gold leaves, represented by carved ebony. And we see in the Blackamoor, the coat of arms is the red cross. The red cross and the Moors in England So when we begin to look into, when we begin to look into the Moors that came into a lot of our lands and that built up these places, I'm gonna hold this. I'm gonna chill out and receive more Mauritania, Moor's Head, Blackamoors. So these pilgrims were clearly okay. I mean, but what do I know? I'm just reading and linking things together. Let's get back to Brother Qumran. I think I can't pronounce his name. I'm sorry, but I'm gonna link his video down.
A more true, a more correct genealogical history of European colonists or just European themselves, indentured servants, prisoners of war, conquistadors, and so on. And again, the book is Jews and Muslims in British Colonial America, a Genealogical History by Elizabeth Hirschman and Donald Yates. And so we go to chapter 4. Yeah, we're already in chapter 4. We've read the previous 3 chapters, the introduction and the prelude and previous videos. Told everybody we're going to go ahead and make sure to get through this book, even if it's chapter by chapter. A lot of great drop in each chapter. So here we go. We're in chapter 4. We're going to continue. It says Massachusetts, Pilgrims, Puritans, Jews, and Moors. The outline of early Massachusetts history is familiar to most Americans. The first settlers arrived on the Mayflower in 1620 with the Pilgrims. The Puritans followed within a decade, setting up the towns of Salem in 1628 under John Endicott and Boston in 1630 under John Winthrop. In that same year, Massachusetts Bay Colony was founded. It absorbed the former colony, brought a large amount of self-government. Within the next decade came more than 20,000 immigrants, almost entirely British, it is said, with East Anglia settled.
I want you guys to know that there is a distinguishment between the Pilgrims and the Puritans, and that's important to know when he's reading this. And I'm about to tell you guys the difference right now. So the Pilgrims were separatists who first settled in Plymouth, Massachusetts in 1620 and later set up trading posts in Quebec River in Maine, on Cape Cod, and near Windsor, Connecticut. Okay, but Puritans were non-separatists. So Pilgrims believe in separating from the Roman Catholic Church, which would explain the Red Cross. They were not part of the Roman Catholic Church, although some of them appear to be Moranos or cryptos, which were, as I forestated, practicing Jews, practicing Moors, but they were known to be anti-Catholic Church, which is where you get your knights, your Red Crosses. And we see this present, I was trying to hold back from, but we see this present in Mount Value, Mississippi, where you have your Knights of Tabor, and they came in to build up Mississippi. And they're called the Knights, and then they have 12 daughters of Tabor, and their belief system is built off the book of Judges, and this was pre-exilic practices, the Israelite practices. And this was before we went into exile, which is, not talking to y'all like y'all dumb, but some people don't know the Bible. So this is before we went into captivities and different slaveries. As my mom was talking about with the Babylonian, the Assyrians, this is before we got watered down and before we bought into other people practices. See, we would go back to the practices of our forefathers of Babylon and of Syria and Mesopotamia, excuse me. We would go back to worshiping that. But then we started to worship gods that our forefathers did not know of. And so the pre-exilic practices, this is when we would still have like our prayer closets and our altars and pouring out libations and casting lots. And we had our own forms of things like that. And so the Pilgrims wanted to separate from the Catholic Church because we know why, but the Puritans were non separatists. And the Pilgrims were the first group. And some people begin to say they're the first group of Puritans, and they, mingle them in. But the Puritans, the Quakers, though they were all different. Now, we'll get into all that maybe at another date, but y'all just needed to know that part. Let him continue.
In the tone. Counties were formed that echoed the rural regions of England, Hampshire, Berkshire, Essex, Middlesex, Suffolk, and Norfolk. Although the northern hilly land of dense forest, stony soils, and a short growing season bore little resemblance to the Puritans' land of origin, farming became the main enterprise of the colony. When the new inhabitants' hard work and zeal had tamed the wilderness, towns with sturdy Anglo-Saxon names like Cambridge, Bristol, Springfield, Salisbury, Boston, Andover, Dorchester, Framingham, Gloucester, dotted the countryside with their typical green commons, trim fields surrounded by fences, and peaceful church spires. When one thinks of Massachusetts, one conjures up images of devout men and women clothed in sad, subdued colors, carrying Bibles and walking solemnly to church on Sunday. Or maybe one envisions the first Thanksgiving, in which these same cheerlessly dressed men and women are gathered around long trencher tables with friendly Indians partaking of wild turkey, venison, corn, potatoes, and jams. Such is the nostalgic mythology of early America. To describe the founding forefathers and foremothers, the author of one standard account, R.C. Simmons, uses the words pious, good, godly, Calvinistic, poor, learned, stead and orderly, saintly, disciplined, and most revealingly homogeneous. According to another author, David Hackett Fisher, one of the foremothers, wears a sad brown dress, and her image combines the strength, resolve, seriousness, dignity, virtue, and gravitas typical of the Puritans. Fisher stipulates that this small uniform group of settlers grew into a regnant population that has essentially lasted to the present day. The immigrants who came to Massachusetts in the Great Migration became the breeding stock for America's Yankee population. They multiplied at a rapid rate, doubling every generation for 2 centuries. Their numbers increased to 100,000 by 1700, to at least 1 million by 1800.
What other people multiplies this quick, y'all? What other people comes into the land, settle among familiar people, share some customs, and begin to multiply?
6 million by 1900 and more than 16 million by 1988, all descended from 21,000 English immigrants who came to Massachusetts in the period between 1629 to 1640. All right, so Dutch the hijack with the, whitewashing. Says social historians contrast the simple rural folkways and purposefulness of Massachusetts families with the middle Atlantic colonies settled by frivolous cavaliers, gambling, all on adventure and independent minded bachelors, right? Bachelors, right? right? Bachelors, right? So they needed wives, right? They took on women, right? These bachelors, what women do you think they took on? Many took on American indigenous wives. Right, we're gonna see who these. We already know what this book's about. We know when we're talking about these early Europeans, who they really were. So bachelors running away from responsibilities. Most commentators point to the middle class, pragmatic nature of the Puritans and emphasize their religious mission to purify the Protestant faith in a new setting where privileged and medieval tradition counted for less than individualism and good works. All right. They are Protestants. Remember who the Protestants were mainly? A lot of these people, again, crypto, Sephardic, Jewish, Moorish people. One might ask, however, what the reformers sought to purify society of and what drove them to withdraw into their own secret congregations in England and the Netherlands, and then take the unusual step of immigrating to a raw, empty wilderness. Why did they do all that? The focus on purity reminds us of contemporary Spain, with its obsessions about pure bloodedness and heresy. What radical bent made the Puritan authorities impose a new system of rule and oppression, forcing many autonomous separatist congregations to steadily splinter in their beliefs and practices? What caused the breakaway settlements soon launched in Rhode Island?
I want you guys to remember that autonomy was known amongst the Israelites. See, we have to begin to bring Hebraic markers into history to begin to prove some things. When the Israelites were in Egypt, what did they do? They lived autonomously in Goshen, or according to Manetho and Josephus, it was called a virus. And we see this in archaeology as well. We see that the Israelites lived autonomously and with the Hamasinian dynasty when we were under Grecian rule. We see Israelites now striving to live autonomously, and some already do. And we see that Moors definitely live autonomously. Let's continue.
Connecticut, New Hampshire, Maine, and Nova Scotia. And why, anyway, did people join in this effort to plant a colony in the bleak, cold north, devoid of any promise of crops, minerals, or valuable exports other than perhaps fish and timber? All right. And that's a very good question that nobody ever seemed to ask. Why would they go and start a colony in Massachusetts? Why? An alternative image of Massachusetts begins to emerge. If one is bold enough to discard the preconceptions, all right, you got to empty your cup, your preconceptions and your beliefs, and dig deeper into the original
and one
record.
thing that I missed is when we're at the census that said the focus on purity reminds of contemporary Spain. What did I say beforehand? The Spanish Inquisition predates this in 1492. Spain wanted to exterminate the Jews from being in there and the Moors. And what do we see happening? Columbus came over here. And then some Sephardic fled back into West Africa. And some stayed in Northeast Africa. Come on, y'all. Let's learn on our way to learning.
Probing the historical backdrop in England and the Netherlands, all right, Holland. The great majority of the passengers on the Mayflower were not actually pilgrims in the first place, all right? They weren't actually pilgrims. Only 35 of the original 102 passengers were from the congregation in Leyden. The rest were miscellaneous persons picked up in London and Southampton. All right, listen, miscellaneous, not everybody was a so-called pilgrim. They don't tell you all this stuff. Out of 102 people, only 30? That's less than half the people on the ship. The financier behind the voyage was the merchant Thomas Weston, English Jewish surname. Weston, a merchant. Who's the merchants? With this and other similar considerations, the pilgrim mothers and fathers may not end up so dowdy and redundant after all. Their complexions become darker than previously envisioned. Boom! Their what? Their complexions become darker than previously envisioned. Wow, he just straight up, he went right to the point, being very subliminal what he's saying, but very literal at the same time. Yeah, their complexions became darker. These were people of color, all right? Empty your cup. Welcome to the truth. Many of the conscripts for Massachusetts appear to be what we call today persons of color. Again, many of the conscripts for Massachusetts appear to be what we call today persons of color. They came from North African, Semitic, and Mediterranean ancestry and preserved distinctly non-Christian religious traditions. Gradually, we begin to suspect that one of the strongest motivations uniting this disparate throng of settlers was the resolve to escape certain institutions in the old world that they galvanized around such enemies as popery and economic oppression. All right, letting you know these people were being forced, a lot of them. Remember, they told us the stories. They were fleeing from religious persecution, but who? Who was? And from who? All right, when you actually go into the history, you see it was Catholics, the Vatican Catholics, the Holy Roman Empire was going after the Gentiles, right? Or those who didn't want to be, Catholics or Christians or follow Jesus, right? Like Jews and Moors or Muslims, all right? So they had to become crypto or secret Jews or crypto secret Muslims, remember?
Let me explain this, guys. It's very important to know that there are many different sects and different belief systems amongst the Israelites. Not every one accepted Yeshua Bar Yosef as the Messiah. Some people believe that other people were the Messiah. Some people believed he was the Messiah as the Bible and the oral tradition teaches. Some people believed he was the Son Messiah as Christianity teaches. And we have to know that when it comes to Rome, they were killing people who did not want to worship on Sunday and keep Easter and Christmas. And they began to take the Israelites' religion and combine it with paganism. And so the Israelites who, regardless of if they were Pharisees or Sadducees, or if they were not accepting the Roman Catholic doctrine at this time, and then before then, there's the Assyrian doctrine, the Babylonian doctrine, the Egyptian doctrine, so on and so forth. If they were not accepting this doctrine, they were being killed. Some of them for practicing like real paganism, but some of them for keeping the laws, statutes, and commandments. Because truth be told, they persecuted Wiccans for something totally different. But we're going to tell the truth. And then some of these people were persecuted because they were practicing true pre-exilic practices, which can look very similar to other things. So let's let him continue.
The common denominator was a resurgence of crypto Judaism, all right? A crypto Judaism, a long dormant strain in English society, fanned into life again through the influence of Spanish and Portuguese Jews taking refuge in the British Isles and Low Countries. Remember, after their diaspora, when the Jews and the Moors got expelled from Spain and Portugal, they didn't just go to North Africa. We got the drop already. A lot of them ended up in different parts of Europe, the British Isles and the Low Countries. was one of the places, or a few of the places. Before we continue, I wanted to go to a video that's going to correlate what the guy was saying about the passengers of the Mayflower, who they were really. And did you know, like, more than half of them were indentured servants? Like he said, he was just picking up people here from London and Southampton. So let's get that video.
Since he mentioned it, let's go into this because very important that we have line up on line precept, here a little and there a little. Because some people be like, oh my goodness, the Bible condones slavery, and they use that white man book to whitewash you and to Christianize you. And no, they actually gave us Near Eastern customs on how it's supposed to be kept. And chattel slavery was practiced in the Near East, and we practice indentured servitude amongst Hebrews. Chattel slavery had no kinship rights, no marriage rights, no personal or legal rights relating to physical protection, and no breach of contract freedom. And so we see that chattel slavery was not part of the Israelite custom and the law of Moses. People were never to be stripped from their man-made rights. Even the Gentiles had a right to convert and to shave their heads and to take a vow. The women, I'll say that, and to take a vow to serve Yod Hed Waveh. The men could concede and become circumcised. And our men were so malicious that they would trick men into becoming circumcised, and the men to say that they'll serve the Most High, and then they'll go in and kill them. I mean, we saw that. That was as a tactic in retaliation for rape. Now we see even Abraham's servants before the law were certainly not chattel slavery. There are a lot of scriptures on Exodus 21 specifically. Okay, this is Deuteronomy 12, Deuteronomy 5. On the Sabbath, your slave couldn't work. And then it begins to talk about a hired help that for 6 years, they're supposed to work for you. And then in the 7th, you let them go free. The Levites, if they had someone that was hired, they couldn't eat of the holy thing. Like it's laws on slavery. And because these Gentiles took things too far, oh, the judgment. What did it say? Murdering a slave could incur the death penalty. Oh, the judgment. I will visit the iniquities of your forefather on the 3rd and 4th generation. So when Gentiles and other nations begin to tell Hebrews, get over it, that wasn't me, baby. Let me let you know something. 400 years is the 4th generation. The iniquities of your forefather will be visited upon you in this generation. We're not waiting for another generation to come. Babe, listen, my God. Okay. Chattel slavery was practiced in Egypt. I'm going to just come from this tab since we already here. Because we're bringing in some connections. We have to prove things. We have to prove things so that people won't say that we're reaching and that we're making up and we're taking another people. You guys see that this is about it. This is about slavery in ancient Egypt. We see they called us Nubians. Those were now let's be clear. A lot of people give Nubia credit, and we know the Kushite, the Nubian dynasty was very, but we have a lot of black people walking around calling themselves Nubian. That's because we take what has been given to us. You could be a Semitic person, but you're not. I can say I'm not Nubian. Did you know that Slavic comes from the word slave? Did you know that? Did you know Egyptian text refers to Bak and Ham, that meant labor or servant, and so this is why you begin to believe that you're a Canaanite because of the curse of Canaan, but they call it the curse of Ham, so they begin to tell you that you are a Hamite. Ham wasn't cursed, Canaan was, and Canaan is not who y'all think it is, and that's another lesson. So we see chattel slavery, waiting to be sold, right? Beats. The chattel slaves were mostly captives of war and were brought to different cities to be sold as slaves. All captives, including civilians not part of the military forces, were seen as royal sources. The pharaoh could resettle captives by moving them into colonies for labor, giving them into temples. So colonies, slavery for labor, colonies for labor. Where do we see that at? We see that throughout the world, not just with Negroes. We gonna be clear. Black people are not the only people. Well, Negro people are not the only people that's going into indentured servitude and chattel slavery, but in a mass way. And then we're going to also tie in that this happened to some Native American tribes as well during this holiday festival that we're coming up on. And so some chattel slaves began as free people who were found guilty of committing illicit acts and were forced to give up their freedom. We saw this a lot. We saw this with the Irish. We saw this with Aborigines. We saw this in Egypt and Assyria and Babylon. We see this today, right? Because of illicit acts, they were forced to give up their freedom. Other chattel slaves were born into life from a slave mother. Ancient Egyptians were able to sell themselves and children to slavery as a form of bonded labor. We see this in the book of Exodus when a man would sell his daughter into indentured servitude if he happened to be poor, and the man could buy her and could either take her as a wife or save her as a wife for his son. If his son does not want her, then he is to let her go. Let's continue. They will be giving them to temples, temple prostitution. Yes, people would be given into prostitution to take care of their homes. Better get a woman her $40. Giving them as rewards to deserving individuals. Giving them as to soldiers as loot. Okay. Some chattel slaves began as free, as I said, blue. Self-serve into servitude was not always by choice, but by the individual's free will. Okay. Oh, some slaves were bought in slave markets near the Asiatic. What you say, you Afro-Asiatic black man and black woman, and then bonded as war prisoners. Not all were from foreign areas outside of Egypt, but it was popular for slaves to be found and collected abroad. This act of slavery grew. Egypt's military status and strength, bonded laborers dreamed of emancipations, but never knew if it was achievable. So these Asiatics wanted to be free in Egypt, but they did not know if they could ever achieve it because Egypt's army just kept growing more and more. Slaves foreign to Egypt had possibilities of return to homelands, but those brought from Nubia and Libya were forced to stay in the boundaries of Egypt. The Nubians, Afro-Asiatic Sebans from Cush, Libyans. Some suppose that this is Afar from Ephir of Abraham and Keturah. So these people lived near Egypt. So they had to stay in Egypt where do Black people be able to flee to today? You can't just go back to Africa and find somewhere and say this is home, unless you are someone that has someone there you can migrate with. But you guys know exactly what I'm talking about, which is why when Marcus Garvey was pushing his back to Africa and all of these Pan-Africanists, and then you have the American Liberia. Liberia was created from freed and emancipated slaves who were forced to go back to Africa. Ask them how they were met. The term shopti look like Shab Sabbath to me. Oh, this is the part. One type of slavery in ancient Egypt granted captives the promise of an afterlife. The Ushaptis were figurines that was buried with Egyptians. Historians have concluded these figures represented an ideology of earthly persons' loyalty and bond to a master. So even in death, as a slave, they were still supposed to be bonded and loyal to their earthly master. They would own you. And this is why us as an Afro-Asiatic Black people are hung on trees, because they know, according to our tradition, that if someone is hung on a tree and they are left up overnight, that they are considered to be a curse, which is why they were going to break the legs of Yeshua Bar Yosef, and they pierced his side to see if life was still on the inside of him, so that the laws of the Jews would be upheld and he would not become a cursed thing. They leave your ancestors hanging on trees as ornaments on these trees that they worship in holly groves and Baphomet ceremonies, as the Druid Celtics did, which we are going to get into, so that in death they still own you and they capture your mind, your body, your soul, and your spirit and tie you in as a curse to who they are with these Egyptian practices, but they are Canaanite practices. And this is because this is who they are. We have to remember that when the Israelites were going through this slavery, these were not Egyptians. The Israelites were able to live amongst Egyptians and live autonomously. The Egyptians had their own rules, but we have to know that the Canaanites, the Amorites, who came out of Canaan, although be Hicks, so y'all, okay, let's just continue. Let's just continue. Okay. The origin of this type of slavery is difficult to pinpoint, but the slaves were willing to be held captive in return for entrances to Egypt. Entrances to Egypt could also be seen as having been giving life. So if you go back into Egypt, which is why the Hebrews began to say, at least in Egypt we had graves. At least in Egypt we had food. Let's continue. This just gonna be a video. I'm gonna let it rock.
Real quick, and then we'll come right back to the book.
This is the story of the Mayflower, actually, of the Pilgrim voyage. On 3 days before or 2 or 3 days before they landed, the majority of the people there, over 50%, were indentured servants, and they staged a revolt on board. And what came out of it is the famous document known as the Mayflower Compact, where all the people there were declared themselves equal, free and equal. They revolted against the form of servitude that most of them had been committed, had signed up to put themselves under. And, through a revolt of revolutionary servants, the first New England colony, Plymouth, became a democracy of sorts. It was a limited democracy, but it was the most democratic society at that time in colonial America. Well, in the colonies, the most of the colonies, or all of the British colonies, were really set up by corporations. And as soon as possible, people who were hooked into it, who were often indentured servants, where they signed up for passage for a certain number of years, they would have to work off the money that the passage cost, and then they were able to get off on their own. And they, as soon as they got out, many of them just ran away from that form of bondage, and went off into the wilderness, and went off into the wilderness.
All right, so again, we continue in the book, Jews and Muslims in British Colonial.
Now, I want you guys to keep paying attention to that word wilderness, because as we continue, we're going to see, and we should already know, that biblically, the wilderness was a reference for the Israelites. They wandered in the wilderness. They're supposed to flee to the wilderness. When your ancestors fled during slavery. Let's continue.
America, a genealogical history. And we're in chapter 4, remember? We're going to continue where we left off. It says here, William Bradford. And again, dodge the hijack on the whitewashing images, because they're letting you know the drop here. Remember that their complexions became darker than previously envisioned. We're talking about Moors and Sephardic Jews. William Bradford. The new version begins like the old, with the writing of the founding fathers, foremost a history composed by William Bradford, first governor of Plymouth Plantation in 1620, 1647. Bradford was born in 1590 at Austerfield, Yorkshire, and he joined the Congregational Church there in 1606. Later, he moved to Leiden in the Netherlands, where he learned Dutch, Latin, and Hebrew. He and his Dutch wife, Dorothy May, Jewish surname, sailed to North America aboard the Mayflower, which landed in December 1620. In Plymouth, Bradford supported his family through fur trading with the Indians, fur trading, all right? Setting up stores in Buzzards Bay and Bradford left furniture and clothes. 1668 makes mention of a scarlet petticoat worn beneath the matron's gray exterior. So much, at least, for the drab taste and killjoy nature of the Pilgrims, huh? Morrison states that the Bradford's history opens with folios occupied by Bradford's Hebrew exercises, which he wrote in circa 1650 in Hebrew. This is what he wrote in Hebrew. Listen, this is a post-Pilgrim, right? Though I am grown-aged, yet I have had a longing desire to see with my own eyes something of that most ancient language and holy tongue, in which the law and oracles of God were writ, and in which God and angels spake to the holy patriarchs of all time, and what names were given to things from the creation. And though I cannot attain to much herein, yet I am refreshed to have seen some glimpses hereof, as Moses saw the land of Canaan afar off. My aim and desire is to see how the words and phrases lie in the holy text. All right, so that's deep. Is he talking about glimpses when he's meaning the Indians? Is that what he's talking about? An ancient language? He's glad he actually saw, or what is he really talking about? Thus, Bradford was most interested in the Torah and Nevi'im, the law and the prophets. This is surely a remarkable sentiment for a man widely perceived as a student of the New Testament and champion of the gospel. He's supposed to be a straight Christian, New Testament, nothing to do with Hebrew beliefs, or even supposed to be that into the Torah. In the same work, Bradford recounts how the French Walloons, remember the Walloons, a lot of those are Moors, were persecuted by the Catholics. All right, that's why they were being persecuted by the Catholics in the Netherlands, about which his editor comments in a footnote. Many thousand Protestants among the French-speaking Walloons, all right, Protestants and Walloons immigrated across the border to the United Netherlands. Some of them joined the Christian church in Leiden, all right, so they joined this church, right, that eventually was one of the hosts of the 30 pilgrims that actually came. One of these was Philippe de la Noye, from Noé, French for Noah. Mm. De la Noye is a well-documented Sephardic surname, and this Protestant De la Noye's family was therefore.
So for all y'all, Delanes, Delani, this is the origin of your name. You know, when they tell us our last name are white because they're English or British or Dutch or Spanish, and they say your colonizers gave you these names. No, these were your ancestors' names coming from Britain and England and France and Spain and so on and so forth. Let's continue.
Crypto Jewish, all right? Real genealogical history. Bradford's history recounts how the Mayflower passengers were originally intended to settle in Virginia and carried letters from Sir Edwin Sandys and John Farrar to that effect. I remember he broke down Sandys and Farrar already. Farrar, Muslim name. Underwriter Thomas Weston issued them the Pierce Patent in June 1621 from the Council for New England, sponsored by the Dukes of Lennox and Hamilton, Earls of Warwick and Sheffield, and Sir Ferdinando Gorges or Jorges. Ultimately, they were swept off course or purposely misled to the North Atlantic coast, as will be established shortly. These men cannot be explained away as the pillars of English Christendom they might at first appear to be. Thomas Weston admitted that foreigners, strangers, had to be recruited to act as laborers and help defray its expenses. They came from London and Southampton, the first and second largest Jewish communities in England at the time. So listen what they were recruiting the so-called pilgrims from, the ones that weren't pilgrims, right? They came from London, a Jewish, and Southampton, that was a Jewish community at that time. Remember, he's talking about Sephardic Jews mostly. In the aftermath of the Indian massacre of the Jamestown settlers, the Plymouth settlers had built a fort. All right, that's a Moroccan surname. All right, so Pori, a Moroccan surname, Pori, Moor. And it says that this Pori visited Plymouth that year and wrote to Bradford a letter of gratitude for the hospitality extended to him. Bradford loaned Pori some books during his visit, described as Mr. Ainsworth's elaborate work upon the 5 books of Moses. These works continue the Hebrew Torah or Pentateuch, corresponding to Genesis through Deuteronomy in the Old Testament. Both he and Mr. Robinson do highly commend the authors as being most conversant in the scriptures. What good it may be please God to work by them through my hands, who find such high content in them. Many of the trade channels used by Massachusetts as well as Virginia were evidently Jewish, all right? Who owned the trade, who had the roots, who had the ports on lock. Remember the port Jews? Remember, let's not forget the previous videos, everything we've learned. Who was holding down the ships and the trade routes? Who was doing that since ancient times? Usually Sephardic or British, crypto, Jewish, or both. All right, that's who's holding on these trade channels used by Massachusetts and by Virginia. Marranos, all right, Marrano. Was a Marrano? Was a Marrano a converted Muslim into Christianity? A Moor, typically partnered with London merchants.
It's important to know that linguistically, he's saying Sephardic. The Sephardim came out of Spain. From what Mommy was talking about, the Northern Kingdom going into Assyrian captivity, these are part of the Northern Kingdom. And so they began to speak Ladino, which was a Jado or a Hebraic form of Spanish. So when they began to come into the Americas and bring Spanish here, that's who brought Spanish here. So when you have your Spanish call Black people Moreno, it's because it just means Black. They're identifying us as Black Jews, Moreno. When you look at your Maroons of Jamaica, these are the same people.
Sephardic Jews, same people who lent their names to the venture for appearance sake. As the Plymouth colonists set about trading with the Indians for furs and fish, they used two factors in London to sell their exports. Bradford reports of this arrangement. We appoint James Shirley Buchan. Deeply religious in character, in that it functioned entirely without the services of a Christian minister through 1635. They didn't even have one. In 15 years, remember, they got there in 1620. They didn't even have a Christian minister. The shepherd finally procured for the flock was named, intriguingly, Jose Glover, but the unfortunate man took ill and quickly died. After securing the services of the Reverend John Norton for about a year, the Pilgrim Church ultimately retained John Rayner or Rainer, Ranier, Raina, Sephardic. That's a Sephardic last name. These are all people of color. Listen, who arrived in 1635 and remained until 1654. A final testimony with regard to Bradford's possible crypto-Jewish orientation is another of his addresses to the people of Israel, that is, the Pilgrims. It is drawn again from his history, written in 1646. Art thou a stranger in Israel, that thou shouldest not know what is done? Are not those Jebusites overcome that have vexed the people of Israel so long, these Jebusites, even holding Jerusalem till David's day, and been as thorns in their sides so many ages, and now begun to score that any David should meddle with them, any David, any descendant of David? They began to fortify their tower as part of the old Babylonians. But those proud Anakims are thrown down, and their glory laid in the dust. The tyrannous bishops are ejected, their courts dissolved, their canons forceless, their service cashiered, their ceremonies useless and despised, their plots for potpourri entered, and all their superstitions discarded, and returned to Rome, from whence they came, from Rome. and the monuments of idolatry rooted out of the land, and the proud and profane supporters and cruel defenders of these as bloody papists and wicked atheists, and their malignant consorts marvelously overthrown. And are not these great things? Who can deny it? Hallelujah. And again, these are Pilgrims. This is from 1646. Language bespeak a deeply embedded anti-Catholic hostility. We believe that only those whose ancestors had been forced from their homes, as the Sephardic Jews were in Spain, would exhibit such direct and forceful anger. By 1620, England was most emphatically not Catholic, and there was little to fear from Catholic influence. Bradford personally had not experienced the religious persecution necessary to ignite such vehemence. Although there are thousands of books on the subject of anti-Semitism, even unconscious, transferred, and sublimated forms of it, one is hard-pressed to find a single study of anti-Christian attitudes or anti-Catholicism in Jews or any other non-Christian group. That it was a persistent theme in Jewish life from the beginning of the persecution of the Jews by the Church of Rome in the early Middle Ages cannot be gainsaid. With the expulsion of Jews from Christian countries, England, right? Remember, this is what I was talking about earlier. The Jews had to go into hiding since 1290 in England, at least France, 1306, Spain, 1390, and 1492, Portugal, 1497, province, 1501, Germany, 1426 to 1450 Southern Italy, and 1541 again, and their concentration into ghettos. All right, who was put in the ghettos? Who was in the ghettos today? Who's still in the ghettos? Things don't change. Venice was the first in 1515, but they lasted until Napoleon around 1800. Resentment against their oppressors built in the Jewish people of Europe. It was expressed as disparagement of the tenets of Christianity, including the doctrine of the Trinity, virgin birth, and Jesus as Messiah, as well as a criticism of all the pomp and ritual of the liturgy, saints' lives, and iconography. The Eucharist was marked as cannibalistic rite, right? You eat in the body of somebody, cannibalistic rite. Our Lady was called our stock, all right? And shout out to Drop Nation and the Dracons, because we got no blood in our cup, no blood in our cup. Again, the Eucharist was marked as cannibalistic rite. Our Lady was called our stock. And saints' images were denounced as heathen idolatry. It even extended to ridicule of the use of the name Mary or any patently a Catholic name like that of an evangelist or saint. So listen, this is what's really going on in these times. This is what these people coming into Europe, this is what they're feeling towards the Catholics, towards their persecution, towards the people that they are disagreeing with and being oppressed by. Jokes about the Pope, monks, priests, and nuns, kneeling postures, ways of lovemaking and cooking. A diabolical papist conspiracy was often glimpsed in the tiniest political rumor or trade news brought in by the ships, and the spectacle of Spain's decline and decadence did not go unnoticed. As 20th century Jewish historian Simon Dubnow commented, in tones probably not dissimilar from the contemporaries of William Bradford and William Penn, a people accustomed to the spectacle of the cannibalistic out of the faith succumbed to savagery. Manners grew steadily coarser. The healthy seed of religion was smothered into superstition and fanaticism. The flourishing land of the Arabic Judaic Renaissance was transformed into a lifeless desert of monks. Once, Spanish Jews themselves were relieved from the necessity of concealing ancestral sentiments by living in enemy states such as France, England, and the Netherlands. They tended to give open.
So just letting a lot of you Hispanics know, if you grew up with deep, deep, deep Catholic roots, I'm just letting you know you're a Sephardic Jew. and that a lot of your people were forced to convert to Catholicism, and they hold on to it so tightly because this is what was given to them. And so a lot of them practice Condoble or Santorini alongside of it to get them closer to Africa because they had to hide what they believed originally. I'm almost done with him talking with this video. Let's continue.
To anti-Spanish, anti-Catholic sympathies, at the same time maintaining a pride in the Castilian language and other aspects of Iberian culture and history. In the New World, many ingrained predispositions must have surfaced, even if transferred to the new circumstances and current events far removed from inquisitional Spain. Family traditions that were only whispered in France or England were repeated with less fear, as the Spanish emperor distinctly insisted that he enjoyed a higher ground in establishing dogma and enforcing laws against heresy as his Catholic Majesty than the Apostolic Church in Rome, presided over by Spanish popes and clergy through much of the 16th and 17th century, even as it was anti-Catholic and anti-Spanish, feeling boiled up and became frequent theme of public discourse or private commentary. Spain's follies, pretensions, and ultimate ruin were the talk of Europe, and it was easy to attribute the cause to an extremist form of Catholicism. We turn now to Benjamin Labarie's 1979 work, Colonial Massachusetts, A History, which provides a more dispassionate, omniscient narrative of the Massachusetts colony, one informed by over 350 years of hindsight. By the 20th century, it was well appreciated that the people who were to become known as the Pilgrims originated as an extreme sect of Puritans termed separatists, all right? They were extremists. They had migrated under the leadership of their minister, John Robinson, example, Reuben, the son of Reuben, Robinson, Reuben, that's where the Robinson is coming, Reuben, to Amsterdam in the Netherlands in 1607, and then moved on to Leiden. In 1606, Sir Ferdinando Gorges, or again, remember that's Jorge in Spanish for George, and Ferdinando is obviously a Spanish given name. Ferdinando, that's Hernando, Ferdinando Cortez, right? And Sir John Popham. So remember, they're trying to tell you that this guy, Ferdinando Gorges or Jorges, is an English guy. Just look at his name. Nobody really questioned that before. And Sir John Popham, both wealthy Englishmen, right? They're supposed to be Englishmen, formed an alliance of interest with Richard Halliock. Remember, this is a Moorish name, to persuade King James I to charter the Virginia Company. They persuaded King James, hey man, you got to do it. They persuaded him. One portion of this charter granted the company the right to colonize between the 38th and 45th parallels. This territory was given to a group termed the Plymouth Company under the command of Raleigh Gilbert, Humphrey's son, and George Popham, English crypto Jewish. John Popham's nephew, after an attempt to colonize the coast of Maine, failed in 1607. The Virginia Company was set up in 1608 in a location substantially farther south. By a chain of coincidences and accidental events, most of the Puritans originally scheduled to board the Mayflower for a second attempt at colonizing the North Atlantic coast were unable to make the voyage. The consequence was
Let's see what happened, because we see in the beginning these pilgrims were trading with these Native Americans and they shared similar customs. Let's see how similar these customs were, because we just proved without a shadow of a doubt that these pilgrims and Puritans were Jews and some Moors. So let's look at the similarities between what these Jews and Moors would have been keeping in comparison to the Native Americans. So the green corn ceremony is an annual ceremony practice among various Native Americans people associated with the beginning of the yearly corn harvest. Bus is a term given to the ceremony. Give me 1 second, guys. Sorry, guys, I'm still here. I'm just getting something together real quick. So as we begin to see, we have the green corn ceremony, and it's an annual ceremony practiced amongst various Native American peoples associated with the beginning of the yearly corn harvest. And busk is a term given to the ceremony by white traders. The word began being a corruption of the Creek word pasuk for a fast. So we see that this was the beginning of their year, and they marked their years by the harvest, by the corn harvest. And this word pasuk, and we see that this is Creek. Now I'm gonna tell you just a little bit. Okay, first of all, the Muskegon, if you're from Chicago, you know it's a group called the Muskegon, whatever. This is a Native American name, okay? And they were known as Samoans. Samoans are part of the civilized five who lived here in the Americas, and they are known to be an Afro-Asiatic Native American tribe. Some people say they're Israelites. Now they are Hebrews. I believe that they are Edomites. Let's see. I'm gonna pull up some scripture and some customs in comparison between, because we know that biblically the Israelites have 2 New Years. If you know anything about the oral tradition, biblically the Israelites had 2 New Years. If you know anything about the oral tradition, we will see that when they left out of Egypt, they used this as a marker and an opportunity to reset the calendar according to the guidance and the commandments of the Most High during Abib. And this was done according to the harvest. And this is where we get Passover, and it's called what? Pesach. Biblical Hebrew. We see we gonna make some correlations. So we even see linguistically similarities already. And this was in the first of the month, or Abib, which literally means spring. And we're not going to make this a full out Passover lesson. We see that this celebrates the Exodus, like I began to say. And this was the beginning of their new year. And let's also look into the other new year. And so this is Sukkot. Some keep this in, and we see that these are converts. Some keep this, it means booths or huts. And we know that when our people, modern day and historically, when they would flee out of bondage, they would go into the wilderness. So just think your great great grandparent fleeing out of slavery in Mississippi, and they're running into the wilderness. I'm going to talk about Mississippi because that's where my people are from, but that's where a lot of us are from. And we know that on the map, my grandfather was born in a place called Egypt, Mississippi. So when we begin to look at Mississippi and look at the etymology, the origins of Mississippi, it's very important for us to know that Mississippi has a lot of, it's the bayous. It's the same thing as Louisiana, parts of Florida, Missouri. And so these are bayou people. And we see the bayous are swamps and lands and swamps and trees. This is the wilderness. So when they say that our people are afraid to swim, who? So we see that these booths were set up. And so the Bible refers to the Feast of the End gathering in Exodus 23 when grains and fruits were gathered at the harvest end, the Feast of Booths. We're going to make these correlations, you guys, because we're about to make these correlations. And the 8th day is considered by some a separate festival. And what is this? The 8th day is known as the solemn assembly. And then the 8th day, let's see what's done on the 8th day in the Bible. Oh, we just missed it. Oh, see, no, we're not going to talk about the Catholic version of things. The importance of the 8th day, because some celebrate these things close together, Yom Kippur, meaning Day of Atonement. This means the fast. This is your solemn fast. Your solemn fast. Okay? The first month is what it occurs because, like I told you, in the oral tradition, the first month of the new year begins to take place in these fall festivals between September and October. You look into Noah's flood, you begin to see some things. And so this is why some take the belief system that Yeshua Bar Yosef, or Jesus the Messiah, Jesus the son of Joseph, was born around this time because it says that he dwelt among us. That's tabernacle. The Feast of Tabernacle is those 7 days when we dwell in booths. And on the 8th day, you fast in preparation. And we know that when a woman in the Hebraic culture has a man child for those 7 days, that child is unclean and that woman is unclean, because that child was born through an unclean birth canal and it touched the blood and the embryonic fluid. And we know that when a woman menstruates throughout that period, she is considered unclean and she's not supposed to work and not supposed to cook and do these things. And she's supposed to be separated in her own booth. So ceremonial speaking, when we come out of bondage and slavery, come on, Holy Spirit, let's piece this thing together. We're going to make it whole, okay? When we come out of bondage and we come out of slavery, our ancestors set in booths to set us aside. And then we prepared for that 8th day to purge and to purify. And on that 8th day in Igbo culture, in most of the Hebrew tribes of West Africa that still practice the 8th day circumcision, they practice it not only for medical purposes, but ceremonial rites to be a rolling away of the skin. We see this when it begins to prophesy the coming back of Yeshua Bar Yosef from the tribe of Ephraim, who was sent to the lost of the house of the sheep of Israel. These are the 10 tribes that was scattered, who had to come back to Jerusalem for the feast days. This representing a circumcision, a killing out, a rolling away of the flesh. So during this fasting, during this green ear corn festival, Yom Kippurim, that was taking place, you see how much information we miss out on and how much we can gather just from that first sentence of this green corn ceremony. So we remember that these are Hebraic markers. This fast and the ceremony documented ethnographically throughout the North American East woodlands and southern eastern tribes. And so it involves what? The first fruits. Do I have to pull up the Feast of the First Fruits, y'all? Because some people don't believe it until they see it. And I understand, I respect it. Don't let people just tell you anything. Don't let them just tell you anything. It's important to know and for things to be proven. Question all things. So the first fruits is not how we've been taught, okay? It's the first agricultural produce of harvest. Now, this was kept in Greek and in Roman and Hebrew religions, which is why it is so easy for these other people to come in and to subjugate the Druze religion, because it is a religious system, because it's kept, it's a custom. Anything that's done and anything that's practiced is a religion. And the first fruits were given to the priest as an offering to the deity. And why is this? Because in Near Eastern culture, we know that the king, well, before we didn't have kings, because the kings belonged to the Gentiles, to the nation. We know that the priest was the earthly representative of Yod-Heh-Wav, who was originally the king of the Israelites. And the priest was the extension of him. And he was the extension of El, who don't come off his throne, but he brings his arm down. That Yod and that Hey, the 5 fingers. Come on, somebody. And the priest would get the first fruits. The Levites, which came out of which came out of Moses and out of Aaron. Miriam was a Levite, a prophetess that was called a prophetess before her little brother Moses was ever called what he was called. So the Levites were the first fruit originally etched out. They did not live amongst the other tribes. The other tribes had their own land allotments. The Levites lived in the temple, and whatever first of the grain, of the golds, of the silver, of the turtle doves, of the flocks, of the geese, of whatever it was that you had in your sustenance went to the Levites, because the Levites were living a holy and set aside lifestyle, and they could not mix and mingle or even marry amongst the other tribes. And if they began to marry a foreigner, their children were not able to do certain things. They were not able to do certain things because they were supposed to be the first fruit, the holies of holiness. This is what your firstborn man-child represents. And on today, it says that in Christians' faith, the tithe is similar, given as a donation. The Christian tithe is literally a donation. And a donation should be able to be written off with your 501(c). It should be listed as a charitable donation, but it is not the tithe. The tithe is specifically given to the Levite. And if you do not identify as an Israelite, you have no business taking an offering from your church, because you do not even ethnically identify as a Levite, and you must prove your genealogy in order to identify as an Israelite, especially in order to identify as a Levite. In the book of Ezra, when the law was rediscovered, people had to prove who their mama was, who their father was, because that's a Jewish practice. Let's just say this, okay? Both men and women mattered in Israelite society. We did not have to struggle. There was no matriarchy, patriarchy. Like, we knew the order of things, but women never had to fight for a voice because we always had one. We never had to fight for authority because we always had authority. We knew who we were, but we knew our roles, and we didn't step outside those dynamics. We had no problem with submission and with silence. We had not to practice silence unless it was in wisdom, but we didn't have to sit there and be quiet. We could ask questions, we could teach, we could do different things. We have to begin to realize that a lot of these practices that we have taken on are pagan in origin. All of this trying to prove and all of these other things are pagan on origin. We have no fight. And then they began to give us Kwanzaa, which was made up by a black man. It's so much we were given. In ancient Greece, because we're going to go here so that we can see the similarities between the ancient Greeks practices of first fruit, were called an offering of Aparchi. During the times of war, this would be a major source of funds. This was the temple of the goddess. I'm not going to butcher this name. There's 3 goddesses. And we need to really, really, really know that 3 goddesses are very, very popular in these different religions and these different cultures. We will see that the Roman Catholic Church gave us Islam, and Islam ended up adapting 3 different goddesses as well. This goes very, very, very deep down the water hole. And so the demos, or voting citizens, will control the operation of the temple by elected boards. What does this sound like? This sounds like your caucus. Does nobody think that is very coincidental, even though I don't believe anything in this earth is a coincidence, that where the laws are determined, it's called the caucus. Why is it called the caucus? Where are these people from? The caucus. We have to begin to make some correlations, okay? And of course, they begin to call the governing party the Episcopal. Come on, y'all. Like, all of this. And so, we know the Hebrew perspective of first fruit. I begin to tell you guys what it was about. And so the individual who's separating one from the other had to be ritualistically clean. And it had to include the best produce in the tribe if the Kohen or priest lived nearby. So these festivals had a lot to do with cleanliness and with purifying. Remember, the brother who was reading the book began to say that it was very important to these people, who's coming in to subjugate or whatnot, to be purified. But we also see this among the Jews, and we see this among these Native American tribes. And so it's important to know that the Green Corn Festivals were practiced widely throughout the Mississippian people. And we're going to make some correlations as to why. And so the green corn ceremony is a celebration with many types representing the new beginning, as we stated. Then the breath maker for the first fruits, and for the New Year festival, the breath maker. What did we say? My parents' church name was Ruach, the breath. Okay. And so then they did stump dances, ceremony of fires. So they had days. And so the first day was fasting, and day 2, I'm gonna link all of this down before. And so at 12 years old, boys are declared men. Where do we see that at? Where do we see that at? Okay, so several tribes that participate in the ceremonies, we need to pay attention. The Yuchi, and so Chi, which is very important. I know a lot of people hook Chi up and see that Chi is Asian in origin, but if we begin to see that Chi, we're just gonna go ahead. I'm gonna link it down below because I did this before. Chi is part of the Most High's epithet for the Most High, Chi Inki, Inik, and Ibu, and Chi means big God or big spirit. And then Ero Jews, we have to know that the ancient Ibu, the Igbo tribe of Gad, they have a priesthood by the name of the Irachu, who began to use Urim and Thummim as a divination in the transatlantic slave trade to judge people to see if they was pagans or not. The Cherokee, the Creek, the Choctaw, the Chickasaw, for sure, and the Samoans, from what I've studied on, would be your Afro-Asiatic, your Edomite. They look just like Israelites because of the close relation. So I'm about to play this video because I think I've proven with some scholarship of this Green Corn Festival. We got us a video. I know it's a little lengthy, but some people love these longer videos, and that way you can come back and play it as many times. And then after this video, we're going to get into some, well, we'll see. Let's go. Okay, so we see that they worship a grain goddess, which for the Jews, the crypto Jews, the practicing Jews, they would have been a problem. And we're going to see why. And this is because to them it was familiar practices. Miss Abba was the Mesopotamian goddess of writing and grain. She is the oldest Sumerian deities assessed in writing and remained prominent through many periods in Mesopotamian history. She was widely common worshipped by scribes in voluminous Sumerian texts and with doxology praised to Nisaba as a result. She declined her old Babylonian period, and so then she began to be worshipped as Nuba. And so remember when we mentioned Sukkot? And also, guys, in June, there's a festival, what the Black Church likes to call Pentecost Sunday. It's another harvest festival around the first fruits. It's what would be called the Feast of Weeks, which is 50 days after Passover, which is marked by another harvest. So you see that the Native Americans, some would have this in June. So we see that Sukkot, sounds like Sukkot to me, was a deity that was closely related to this grain deity. And she's in the court of Enlil. Enlil is the god of the earth. Some people, I'm not saying me, say that he's the god in the garden creating, that his mom would be Ki, and him and Enki are brothers, and their parents and An or Anu, and their which would be their father representing the sky, and Ki would be their mom representing the earth, and they make the Anunnaki. And so we see that this character is also tied into Dagon, was the god worshipped in ancient Syria in the middle of the Euphrates. In Dagon, we know it also says the city of Mauritania, and Huranians. This was worshipped in the Near East in the Fertile Crescent. So the Huranians, the Kumarmians, all of these people, the Hittites, the Canaanites, all of these people, they had similar worship practices, okay? And so we're going to begin to, and Nusabi was the lady of wisdom, professor of great wisdom, undersurpassed, overseer, open of the mouth of the great gods. And we see wisdom in Proverbs 8 begin to open up her mouth and cry out loud. So let's get into some more knowledge, guys. Okay, so we saw in that article, I believe, yes, when we began to talk about the harvest practices of the Greeks and of the Romans. Now, and I mentioned the Druids. So let's get into who the Celtics and the Druids are. I'm going to play this video from this anthropologist by the name of Survive the Jive. I'm not going to play the video in its entirety, but it's important that we know what people groups we're dealing with when we talk about practices, because without knowing that we're just ignorant. So listen to this video very closely, please.
It's usually associated with the British Army, and with bagpipes, tartan, ginger hair, and myths about fairies and monsters. From classical times right into the early modern era, it was believed that they were the original indigenous peoples of Europe, although the ancient Celts themselves never made that claim. More so than any other ethnic group in Europe, the truth of the Celts, through a combination of their mystical folklore, the popularity of Romanticism in Britain in the 19th century, and the need among regional nationalists to define themselves in opposition to the dominant culture of Britain, has been grossly distorted. The author of Lord of the Rings, J.R.R. Tolkien, wrote, "Celtic is a magic bag into which anything may be put and out of which almost anything may come. Anything is possible in the fabulous Celtic twilight, which is not so much a twilight of the gods as of the reason." The problem stems in large part from the fact that Celt sometimes refers to indigenous Northwest Europeans, who formerly spoke or do now speak insular Celtic languages, while also referring to an historical ethno-linguistic culture on the continent which encompassed many diverse peoples. Sometimes people get these two things confused. Modern genetic science has proven that the Celtic language speakers were not a prehistoric people, nor were they a homogeneous racial group. Rather, Celtic culture originated in Central Europe, where its language and art spread out over the Iron Age and was adopted by diverse races from Anatolia to Ireland. Even the insular Celts of Britain and Ireland do not constitute a homogeneous genetic group, which makes sense historically, since the insular Celtic nations were constantly at war with each other. For example, the Irish took Cornish slaves and invaded Scotland. The old dichotomy of Germanic versus Celtic blood doesn't make much sense when you consider that the land now known as Germany was in fact a heartland for Celtic culture long before it arrived in Britain. What most people call Celtic blood is really British pirate, and if we are to speak of Germanic blood, it ought really to refer to Nordic, not German, since Germanic languages come from Denmark when Germany was largely Celtic. Confused yet? Archaeologists of the 19th century, Austria had the identifiably Celtic types of art, and subsequent discoveries have proven that Austria, Switzerland, Czechia, and Germany were the oldest homelands of the Celts. But where did they come from? The dominant regional culture of the Bronze Age was the Unitica culture, an Indo-European culture with barrow graves which grew powerful due to the rich copper and salt mines of the region. A complicated of cultural fusion occurred there with the Eastern Belgica culture, which was also Indo-European. By the Middle Bronze Age, the Unitica culture was followed by the Tumulus culture, which preserved the ancient Indo-European tradition of burial mounds, and probably spoke a language ancestral to both Celtic and Latin. This in turn was replaced in the Late Bronze Age by the Urnfield culture, in which burials in barrows went out of fashion, and people started burning their dead and putting them in urns, a tradition which may derive from surviving pre-Indo-European rites like those among the Romanian Cucuteni Tripilia culture. It is likely that people in the culture were still Indo-European in most respects, and that they spoke Proto-Celtic, the first.
Okay, let's do what we do. Let's pause to learn on our way to learn. So he said a lot. It's very important that we realize that he mentioned that these people were found where in the British Isles, and basically all of the places that he said that the book before stated that a lot of the Sephardic Jews and Moors went down into after they were expelled from Spain. So remember that it was black people and Moors in these people amongst the Celtics and so forth. Also said that Germany was a hotbed for Celtic people and for Celtic practices. Let's look biblically to see who German is, or if German is even mentioned in the Bible. Ashkenazi, plural Ashkenazim, from the Hebrew word Ashkenaz, meaning Germany. Members of the Jews who lived in the Rhineland Valley and in neighboring France before their migration eastward to Slavic. Didn't I just tell y'all earlier that Slavic means slave? And these are the descendants after the Crusades, the 11th and 13th century, and their descendants. Okay, so let's keep in mind that the original Ashkenazi would have been describing slave Jews during the Crusades. Okay? Now, that is separate. That is separate from, because we also have to realize that some of these Ashkenazi were not only what I'm about to show you guys, but Sephardic as well. And this is where you get a lot of people that were anti-Zionism who did not want to rebuild a man-made state of Israel because that's not what the Bible told them to do. Then you had some Ashkenazi converts who are Zionists. Let's get into this. Who is Ashkenaz in the Bible? Ashkenaz is the name of one of Noah's descendants and a reference to the kingdom of Ashkenaz, prophesied to be called together with Arat and Miniana to wage war against Babylon in Jeremiah 15 and 27. Let's get into it. We teaching here. Nothing can be deemed Ashkenaz is the first son of Gomer and a Japhetic patriarch. Japheth refers to descendants of Japheth. Japhites refer to the descendants of Japheth, one of the 3 sons of Noah. The term has been adopted in ethnological and linguistic writing from the 18th to the 20th century, but has now become obsolete. Ashkenaz was first associated with the Scythian cultures, then later with the Slavic territories. Okay? Come on now. His name is related to Assyrian. The Scythians expelled the Gomers. These are Japhetic people, Indo-Germanic people. We have to how the name of Ashkenaz came to be associated in the rabbinic literature with the Rhineland as a subject of speculation. I'm gonna tell y'all why they started associating the Rhineland with Ashkenaz. And it's not why y'all think. Let me take a sip of this water. Sometimes in the post-biblical early medieval, which was what the early Middle Ages, sometimes controversially referred to as the Dark Ages, is typically regarded by historians as lasting from the 5th or 6th century to the 10th century. They mark the start of the Middle Ages of Europe historically, okay? So this is the Dark Ages, when things start to get whitewashed and to change, when history starts to become a little watered down. Ashkenazi Jewish culture later spread in the 16th century. In the 16th century, y'all. Mind you, this is when a lot of conversions began to happen. Now, this is also talking about Spain begins to identify the Sephard, like I began to say. Obadiah, that's a book that's for Canaanites and these Edomites. So be very, very clear that Ashkenazi Jewish culture later spread in the 16th century after the Middle Ages, after the Dark Ages. Be clear. Be very clear. We also have to realize that when some historians are talking about the Ashkenazim, it's because they are talking about the Crusaders. And just like I just proved, the Crusaders, the Puritans, the Pilgrims, these were the Crusaders. I'm sorry, the Ashkenazim start to be called the Crusaders. And they were directed by the Latin Church. And this is very, very important to know. We're mixing in with the Byzantine Empire and bringing it into correlation with that which followed, which is what I was going to say is what I was mentioning earlier, followed all of this. And so the Crusaders was directed by the Latin Church in the medieval period. This was during those dark ages. And so the Crusaders would begin to come in. And the Ashkenazim originally, not the true meaning that I'm about to show y'all, not the Israelites that was in Germany and in Rhino, not those. The Ashkenazim were known as the Crusaders. They worked with the Latin Church during the Middle Ages. Then they became what the world calls your Ashkenazi Jews. This is what this says. It begins to say, concurrent military activities in the Iberian Peninsula. Who was in the Iberian Peninsula? Moors, Maroons, Cryptos, Jews, Sephardics, and in northeastern Europe against West Slavic. What I just tell y'all, who was in the Slavic slaves? I'm telling y'all, the Baltics and Finnic people. Cathars. That's it's a lot, y'all. Let's begin to talk about let's keep it right here to do some further proving. If I move on here. So the Ashkenazi Jew, they mingled with some of the Sephardic, as we see. The Ashkenazi Jewish. They're a Jewish diaspora who consulated in the Roman Empire, okay? Yiddish, who developed during the Middle Ages. This was birthed out of the Middle Ages. As I just said. As I just said. They are not considered the same as the Sephardic, the Mizraim, those from the Levant. They are mostly European. And you see, it led us right back to what I was just saying. And it began to go into the wars. I'm going to link all of this below. Okay. By the 11th century, Jewish settlers moved from South Europe and Middle East Jews. These were Babylonian Jews and Persian Jews because these are the Jews that came out of Babylonian and Persian exile. The Marabi Jews were from North Africa. Let's get into this. Let's talk about the Rhineland. The Jews of the Rhineland. Then I think we're going to go back into Savada Jive so he could talk to us a little bit more about these people and what they practice. Afro-Germans during the Holocaust, the Nazi regime, let's just take some of this with a grain of salt. The Nazi German regime did not have an organized program to eliminate African Germans. However, the regime discriminated against and persecuted them. Some Black people in Germany and German-occupied territories were isolated, and a known number was sterilized, incarcerated, or murdered. It's very important for us to see this so that we can also see, where all of these cultures mixed and mingles amongst us. And then I'm going to get back to the Native American and how it was easy for these people to come over here and mix in the green corn, the Sukkot, with their pagan practices, and also just exposing some German and some Celtic practices, which we see leads back to Cain. They sterilized us, incarcerated us, murdered us. And what were we called? The Nazi forcefully sterilized a group of Afro-German children whom they degradedly called the Rhineland bastards. Most of these children were a progeny of French colonial troops. The French Revolution, French Jews, they were living in the Rhineland. Am I reaching? No, I'm not. I'm just being funny. Did you guys know about this, though? Did y'all know about this? I'm just wondering. Just wondering. Did y'all know about this? Did you? Okay. Just wondering. French Jews in I just typed this in. I don't even have to click on this. The Rhineland massacres of Jews in the first. Okay, y'all. Let's go back to Survivor Job.
Truly Celtic language. This that culture over the Iron Age, which itself becomes the Latène culture, named after a site in Switzerland where thousands of objects had been deposited in the lake, presumably in a ritual fashion, as was the custom for Celts in Britain also. While Hallstatt material culture still resembles earlier Bronze Age art, the Latène style of art is clearly the basis for later art of the Iron Age Celts in Gaul and Britain. The narrative I have just presented is not new, but has often been contested, with some even claiming a British origin for the Celts. However, with recent advances in genetic science in the last 10 years, we no longer have to rely on the vague suggestions of art and haplogroups, but can look at genome-wide analysis of ancient DNA from Celtic skeletons. Although a thorough new study on the spread of the Celtic people in Europe hasn't been done yet, the DNA from Iron Age and Bronze Age Britons has been made public, and we can see there is a shift over time caused by approximately 10% admixture from a Central European source related to Hallstatt people. The two black stars on this PCA chart represent two skeletons from the Hallstatt culture, and it can clearly be seen that one plots among modern Dutch people and one among modern Northern French people, but neither plots among modern British Celtic areas. However, the purple Iron Age British Celts on the chart are between the older Bronze Age British samples and the Hallstatt samples, indicating there was an invasion of continental Celts to Britain who were related to these Hallstatt samples, and that these people changed the DNA of Britain and Ireland. Furthermore, a 2018 paper by Damgaard and colleagues titled The First Horse Herders and the Impact of Early Bronze Age Steppe Expansions into Asia, which wasn't about Celts at all, included a lot of ancient DNA samples, one of which, labeled MA2197, came from Iron Age Anatolia during the Hellenistic period. Now, MA2197 appears to be a mixed individual, with half of his ancestry coming from local Greco-Anatolian stock, and the other half from an invading Central European person, like the Celtic-speaking Hallstatt people in Czechia. That is not at all shocking if you know that there were Celts in Anatolia at that time called Galatians. The 9th book of the New Testament of the Christian Bible is addressed specifically to the Galatians, some of whom had already converted to Christianity within living memory of the death of Christ, and who St. Paul said should not observe the Jewish customs such as circumcision that Christians had formerly observed. The first Galatians entered Anatolia via Thrace in 278 BC, led by Leotarios and Leonorios. They remained pagan for over 300 years there, worshipping Celtic gods alongside Greek ones, and mingling with Hellenic and Illyrian peoples of Anatolia over the Iron Age. However, if Celts had originated in Britain, coming into the region, but we see Hallstatt-related DNA, thus reinforcing the theory that Central Europe, not Britain, is the original Celtic homeland. Celtic culture did not expand as an empire like that of the Romans. There was no centralized government or Celtic capital city. Rather, many regional Indo-European tribes traded with the wealthy Celts of Central Europe, intermarried with them, and adopted their language and aspects of their culture, such as their art and their gods. But why was their culture? Their success must be partly due to their military and technological prowess. Celtic developments in metalworking were highly advanced for their time, and it is telling that the Proto-Germanic word for iron, Isera, is actually a loan word from Proto-Celtic Isernon, meaning bloody and red. Even the supposedly more advanced cultures of the Mediterranean learned from the Celts. The Etruscans, then the Romans, learned about advanced weaponry from the Celts who invaded Italy. Dr. P.F. Starry says their weapons, helmets, shields, and tactics owed much to the Celtic innovations, emphasizing that Celtic weapons were a major influence on the Etruscan and Roman military systems. The Celts brought the iron knob helmet with a round cap and neck and cheek guards to Italy, where Etruscans and Romans copied it. The Celts also originally had larger and better shields than the Romans, who first used small shields. Diodorus Siculus wrote, "They have man-sized shields, decorated in a manner peculiar to them. Some of these have projecting figures in bronze skillfully wrought, not only for decoration but for protection. The Romans copied these and started to make larger shields called in Latin scutum, which may also be a Celtic loanword from the same root which gives us the Irish word sciath, meaning both shield and shoulder. The Roman word for a light spear, lancia, which is related to the English word lance, is also of Celtic origin, as is materis, which means pike. While chariots of war had fallen out of use in most parts of the world by the Iron Age, the Celts had preserved this Bronze Age technology and upgraded it. They invented iron rims for the wheels. The Latin word for a travelling cart, covincarius, comes from a Celtic word for war chariot, covinus. Caesar related how the British used chariots to great effect against his legions, and archaeology shows they were also in use among the Irish. This oak statue of a Celtic warrior was found in the harbour of Geneva Lake in 1898. It belongs to the Latine culture and wears a tunic. It was dated by means of 3 Celtic silver coins of the 2nd century BC, which were in a fissure in the statue, and is thought to depict a Celtic deity who may have been associated with Lake Geneva. The museum emphasizes the association with human sacrifice. Like all Indo-European pagans, the Celts believed in many gods. Like Hindus, Celts believed in dual and triune deities, and these are sometimes represented in the idols. For example, this stone head from Wiltshire has 2 faces.
Okay, he drops entirely too much gems for me not to stop. And yeah, God of the Gateways. Let's do some stuff since we've been talking about the bayous. Let's put some Mississippian culture, Moors, some just bring it out all in. Just bring it all in. So mounds were a place of worship in many places. We're gonna start with these mounds first. Yeah, so we should just bring it all the way around. I've done this before, but not with the Native Americans. So we're gonna bring this all around. Just do this real quick. These are mounds. This is a mound in Egypt. Okay, we're gonna make some. The internet is not acting completely right. Here we go. Mountaintop theology. Okay, just know that mound builders were Hiberos. I'm gonna link all of this below. Igbo before these were destroyed. This is the Igbo mound. And Ani, the mother goddess that I referred to, she was worshipped on top of this mound. And you had your mound builders of Mississippi, Native Americans. This is the mound right here. is the only black town, and it was built up by the Moors. Let me just. So y'all can get this mound values. Okay. And was started by Joseph E. Davis, who was a lawyer. He was wealthy. It's a lot of this, because then I'm gonna have to get into the true identity of. Okay, so let's get into this part. Here we go. The International Order of 12 Knights and Daughter of Talbot. I was telling you guys about this earlier. Its founder was the 12th Order of Anti-Slavery Society, and it was organized in Missouri, as I said, by Moses. He's a clergyman, African-American Methodist. We have to know that the Methodist Church was built up by some Masons. And they came into the West Indies, England, and Africa. You see that? The Red Cross. I'm telling y'all. The Red Cross just happens to be in Mississippi with these knights. I don't, y'all just tell me. Y'all just tell me. They had their own hospital, on everything. They actually have. Everything. Misspelling stuff, y'all, because the keys and my nails. Mount Value. I'm just put this up here for y'all. A source as the Scottish Rite Museum, the Talbot Hospital, Mount Value, Mississippi. Just letting y'all know. Y'all Freemasonry got and what's the goings on. He mentioned, and then the other brother mentioned how the Eucharist was looked at as cannibalism. I'll link down below. Survivor Jive video I've bought on here before about how these Celtic people, that's what he mentioned, cannibalism. These Celtic people who clearly had an impact on Greek and Roman society, right? And they would use the horse as the Eucharist. And so when the Romans, and they're saying drink from the blood and the flesh, and they do it that way, this is going back to phallic worship. And that's all of this culture. I know y'all like, here you said an hour. Nah, well, I just figured I might as well teach it out, because only the Most High know when I'm gonna come on here and do another video. So let's see if I'm gonna go back to Survive the Job. The two-faced God, this is what I was going to get into. That's what I remember, because it's so much information. And that's why I went into the Mississippi, so that you guys can see. Who, for us here, the America and the West Indies, would be. We're going to bring it out today. Don't want to be seen, right? Papa Legua is a EY in Haitian voodoo and Louisiana voodoo who serves as an intermediary between the EY and humanity. He stands at spiritual crossroads and gives or denies permission to speak with the spirits of Guni and is believed to speak all human languages. In Haiti, he is the Elocutioner, and that is the study of formal speaking and pronunciation, grammar style, and tone, as well as the idea and practice of effective speech and its form. So when y'all be speaking in tongues, Papa Legba understands you. Okay? Papa Legba is invoked at the beginning of every ceremony. Dahomey, that's the tribe of Dan. June 13th is his festival. That falls right in line with okay. He's synchronized with the dog. Anubis, probably. Okay. Crossroads, explain him. Meet him at the crossroads. In the study of the Delta blues, it originated in the Mississippi Delta. The harmonica, the guitar. Rama Palmer discussed the appearance of Legba in blues lyrics and lore. Palmer notes that Legba can be referred to as the devil, Papa Legba, and the black man throughout the history of blues. This is voodoo and the blues, voodoo and the blues, voodoo and the blues. And all of this has a lot to do with one another because you have to know that the Native Americans, what y'all think they was over here practicing voodoo and hoodoo, mixed in with Yahweh worship. And so were some of these Jews and Moors who fled. And so they were able to still keep their festivals and mix and mingle. And then when some of them came over who did not agree with it, and they saw it, they put them in indentured servitude. It's just that simple. It ain't that deep. It's not even that deep. It's not that deep. It's just not. It's not. And so then you guys know, since he talked about the two-faced God, we just gonna tell y'all just a little bit more how you worship Papa Legba every New Year as well. Might as well. Janus, the two-faced God. In Roman mythology, the beginning, gates, transitions, time, duality, doorway, passages, frames, and endings. Y'all get it yet? Y'all get it yet? Juno was mistaken as the tutelary demon and deity. We know that Juno is for what? June. She's a goddess. A daughter of Saturn. Saturn worship, Saturnalia. Like, come on, y'all. Y'all done learning yet? Y'all done learning yet? So if we know that Janus is for January and the Lord of the gateways, and then in this video with Survive the Jive, he begins to make the correlation between the Celtic and the Latin for archway or door. We know that Shema Israel, Chuku Okiki Ombiama Ekad, meaning, or Shema Israel, Adonai Ekad, Adonai Elohenu. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord, and I shall love him with all their heart, thy soul, and thy might. This is supposed to be up on the doorpost. You're supposed to take the scripture and put it up on the doorpost. And so we know having the doorpost, this is, and then we see it. And he mentioned Sanskrit and the similarities between Hindu and Roman. So we see he mentioned Sanskrit and the similarities between the Hindu and the Celtic. So it's important for us to, I'm gonna show you guys even more. Door, Hindu, Celtic, travel, to ride. And Janus would be an action name expressing the idea of going forth, passing. And this would worship the Indo-European Dianas or Diana, or from the root Yah. And we know Apollo and Diana. Guys, do I have to do this every video? Some of y'all new here, so I'm going to go ahead and take it here. So let's see, who is Diana? Diana was a Roman and Hellenistic religion, primarily considered a patroness of the countryside, hunters, crossroads, and the moon. She is equated with the Greek goddess Artemis. Diana is also worshipped as Venus. I'm going to let y'all know that. Moon goddess. And we're going to see who she worshipped as in Africa. Apollo is the Olympic god of dance, healing, prophecy, disease, the sun god. So sun and moon worship. And y'all hold on to that Sanskrit meaning of the door. We know that in the book of Exodus for Passover, the Israelites had to mark their doors with the lamb blood and with hyssop so that the destroyer wouldn't come and destroy the door. That means that the destroyer had power over doors, gateways, and crossroads. Let's learn. Okay, who is Venus in Africa? The mother for Europe and the Europe are part Benai Ephraim, the son of Ephraim, who were known to go off. Leave Ephraim alone to his idols. And Ephraim and his mother, they like idol worship. They love to go back to Mesopotamia. And so Oshun is the goddess of the water, purity, fertility, love, and sensuality. She possesses human traits such as vanity, jealousy. Okay, so let me see if it's the article so I can show you guys the short. See? You might be familiar with Venus and Aphrodite, the goddess of love. In West Africa, we have it too. And we see y'all know who the daughter of Oshun is. Y'all already know. Proudly and boldly. I have a few cousins and relatives who are daughters of Oshun too. And this is the worship of Venus. Let's look up the Black Madonna, since it was mentioned earlier. See? Learning on your way to learning. So let's see. Oh, it's a video. I don't know if it's gonna come up. It's a There's a video that I was watching, And I think I'm just have to link it down below probably. This is not the one. So I'm going to find the one that I'm looking for. This one was okay, but the one that I'm looking for began to talk about the calling. It begins to talk about the voodoo influence on the Black church and how the Baptist ministers of Mississippi got the call and response from the blues music. And we know that blues music talks about voodoo and hoodoo, which are two totally different things. But these are also mound builders and people who practice free masonry. So I'm going to continue this video from Survive the Drive. Then I'm going to read a couple articles and close it out. Oh, and we also need to remember he was talking about the influence of the Celtics on those different cultures, but he also mentioned North the Levant and Anatolia and where all of these things were taking place from. So this lines up with the biblical narrative as well.
God is from the Celtic sanctuary of Roquepartus in France and is dated to the 3rd century BC. This Celtic sword from 60 BC has been beautifully decorated with a face, perhaps of a warrior or a god. We will never know, but such faces are a common feature of Celtic art. Gold was also important, as Diodorus Siculus relates. They amass a great amount of gold, which is used for ornament not only by the women but also by the men. For around their wrists and arms they wear bracelets, around their necks heavy necklaces of solid gold, and huge rings they wear as well, and even corselets of gold. And a peculiar and striking practice is found among the Upper Celts in connection with the sacred precincts of the gods, as for in the temples and precincts made consecrate in their land, a great amount of gold has been deposited as a dedication to the gods, and not a native of the country ever touches it because of religious scruple, although the Celts are an exceedingly covetous people. This 1st century BC bucket is one of the best examples of Celtic art. Large buckets like this one were used for serving beverages at feasting occasions. The elaborate decorations of mythical animals and human heads distinguish it from your everyday buckets and mark it as a symbol of status and power. Discovered in 1807 in a Celtic cremation burial at St Margaret's Mead near Marlborough, these kinds of buckets start to appear in Britain at the same time as Gallo-Belgic coinage in the 2nd century before Christ, indicating an increased cultural connection to the continental Celts at that time.
I'm going to let this video go here and link this below. There's a book that I read from in one of my other videos, and it begins, because I know you guys possibly saw those eyes, and those eyes look a lot like the artifacts of in Mesopotamia, and those are Hittites and Canaanite people. And a lot of people try to give some type of origins to some of these Celtic people. And there's a book that's linking some Phoenician origins, and we need to know that Phoenician and Canaanites is what birthed Europe. And so this is why a lot of these practices mixed in together. So I'm going to read you guys this article, these couple articles to tie in the practices of Thanksgiving right now. And go ahead and close out. So the pagan roots of Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving pagan roots, the secrets and the symbolism. This is pagan history, so this is written by a pagan, the gypsy. So anybody making this up. So it begins to talk about the Romans celebrated a holiday called Cerilia in early October. The festivities were included feasting while thanking the goddess of the harvest, Sirius. That name's paused me. I'm sorry. Okay, I'm not okay. I gotta look into this. And this was they honored Demetra. She was the goddess of the harvest, agriculture, and especially corn. So the Native Americans who they worshiping the corn goddess, the harvest goddess. The Celtics and Anglo-Saxons had many celebrations connected to thanking the gods to protect the harvest. Lamas, Mabon, and Samhain were the names of the great harvests. These are Celtic festivals. And so later the Puritans would shun the harvest as well as Christmas and Easter's on the grounds that they had pagan origins. So this is why these people came over here subjugating, as I said. I could have just read this article in the beginning. But no, I like to prove things so that you guys can know. And I can show and prove. And so we see that this is why. This is why. This is why. So they worshiped this creator God similar to the Christian God, which is what we always said. Yahweh worship with synchronization. And so we see the cornucopia is a horn-shaped basket, and we know the horn in ancient Israel and even among West African tribes, specifically like the Igbo and Shan. You blow it. It's a shofar. And it contains the items such as fresh fruit, dried grains, vegetables. And so this dates back to Greece. And a goat broke off its horn and offered it to Zeus as a sign of reverence. The goat. And it's the image of Capricorn. So this is leading back to the zodiac. And Capricorn, I believe, isn't that like January? And yeah, demonstrates the gratitude and offering and thanksgiving. Corn, turkey. The Igbo have corns too, and they have a harvest festival and a grain festival. And when they begin to build up their harvest, they leave the outward parts for the poor to glean from. And this is another Hebraic marker. So, hopefully I was able to prove my point to those of you who like to study history, who like to learn, to see the Hebraic markers between the Native Americans, the Israelites, to historically, biblically, archaeologically begin to prove that some of the people that was coming over here were Moors and Sephardic Jews, Black people. And we shared a lot of similar customs between the Native Americans until some more of us mixed with some white people came over here. I hope you were able to learn that during the Holocaust, Black Jews were being killed and being slaughtered, as well as some Northern Kingdoms, Sephardic, and they began to get pushed down into France, and they're still there. German, we're everywhere, and so are the Sicilians, who identify some as Moorish and as Israelites, that we're everywhere, and that's what it is. And so are converts to our religion, and we are supposed to treat the stranger amongst us just as a brother or sister. They don't have all the same benefits, though. So this is Jacolia of Jacolia Gems. Thank you for once again coming back to view my channel. Go ahead and like this video, comment, share, and subscribe. Peace out.